Good evening, members. Seems like a long time after all this excitement of the general election. If for those watching online, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Councillor Steve Bartlett, and I'm the chairman of this BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board. So welcome. I'll hand over to Democratic Services, who will read up the administration notice for the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front car park. Finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Do you have any apologies?
We've received apologies from Councillor Felicity Rice.
Thank you. And substitute members?
No substitute members, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other interest on any items on the agenda? Nope. Okay, thank you, members. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. Do you have any comments on the minutes of the last meeting? Can't remember that far back, eh? Okay. Okay, well, take those as read then. Thank you, members. Agenda item 5, public issues. Do we have, sorry?
Chairman, I wrote to Democratic yesterday to ask them to make a slight amendment, and that is that I was present at that last meeting, but I'm not recorded as being so.
Thank you. Noted, thank you. Agenda item 5, public issues. Do we have any public issues?
No public issues for this meeting, Chair.
No public issues, thank you. Okay, recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committees. We do have one from the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee, that the board consider the inclusion of an item on BCP Council's consultation process on its work plan. Can you tell us any more about that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This arose during an item at the Environment and Place ONS Committee where Paul Park was considered, and there was a discussion there around public consultations and a wish and recommendation into this committee to do some work on that. You do already have something on that on your work plan, which I'll raise later on for you. Okay. And would you like me to outline the other recommendations?
Yes, please.
Yeah, there are 2 other recommendations that have come from the Health ONS Committee. At that committee, in a working group, they have created a data use toolkit which brings together the full data and policy landscape around health ONS. That has been accepted by the committee for use and implementation, and they have suggested that that be rolled out to all the other ONS committees as a useful sort of tool for ONS. So there's a recommendation there for that to be included in the ONS action plan, and also that it be highlighted within the ONS annual report. So that's something that would happen anyway through officers, but you have the overarching role for overview and scrutiny, so it's being raised through your board.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, I can certainly confirm that we do have already the public consultation item on our forward plan. And it seems that one of the other committees wants us to consider that as well. And so I think I've no problem in agreeing with that. And I think it's a useful piece of work that we need to do. Very important piece, actually. The other items about the data, again, I think this is a lot of work went into looking at the data requirements. Now we might be able to utilize data in our analysis of items that come on the agenda. So I think that's a really useful thing that we could, and I suspect that we will develop it along the same lines that we did before. But I don't know if members have seen the paper that was issued on the use of data at overview and scrutiny meetings. Nobody's seen it? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. That's some very good looking pictures of individuals are on that particular panel on it? No, you obviously didn't look at it. So if you get a chance, please have a look at it. So I'd like to propose that we do put these on the forward working plan. Do I have your seconder for that?
Yes.
Yeah, Chair. All in favour or against? No, all in agreement. Okay, thank you very much. So it brings us to agenda item 7, the financial outturn for 23-24. And what I'd like to do, members, if you don't mind, is amalgamate that with agenda item 8, which is the medium-term financial plan, the MTFP update. They do sort of roll into each other quite conveniently, so I think it is probably the best way of managing that. I think Councillor Cox was going to introduce this paper, and he's online, I see. So, Councillor Cox, would you, if you're happy to include those two items together, do you want to sort of introduce them as a package? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Mr. Chair. If I'll do with one at a time, in terms of the financial outturn 23-24, you know, this is really a good news story, and I'd just like to remind everyone that the budget for that year, 23-24, was set by the previous administration, and despite the fact that there were included in it, there were £34 million worth of savings included in the budget, previously an unprecedented amount, which included £6.7 million of unidentified transformational savings. It also relied on £30 million worth of drawdown from reserves, effectively depleting our reserves to an unacceptable level. The unprecedented savings targets were challenging, but nonetheless, the officers from each service department, supported by the Three Towns Alliance, delivered 94% of them, which I think was a creditable achievement in the circumstances, but no doubt assisted by the complete freeze on expenditure during most of the year in question. In addition, we were able to reduce the drawdown from reserves by £7 million, representing about a 23% of the budgeted drawdown, which is almost exclusively from lower than expected demand from adult social care packages. I'm afraid the turnaround in the children's services, which we've been hearing about recently, has come at a significant cost, as well as the investment in the transformational services of £2.5 million. The service area was overspent by £3.4 million due to excess demand. It needs to be noted, although that we have a balanced budget for this year and the next few years, we have that is zero, resilience reserves left to fall back on. The financial position of the council, whilst being stabilised, is still weak, and we cannot relax on keeping a firm grip on the finances. So that really talks to the financial outturn to 23-24. In terms of the medium-term plan, I just again like to remind everybody that we're in an unusual position insofar as we've got a balanced MTFP for 4 years, and clearly we would like, if at all possible, to maintain that. The reports that you have before you aims to do just that, and we are considering the impact of certain assumptions that we included in the original MTFP, which have been made. We've then proposed a financial strategy to support the delivery of the 25-26 budget and a budget planning process and key timelines for financial reports. We have also presented in that paper the outcome of the SIPFA financial resilience review, and if you'll excuse me, beg my forgiveness for highlighting the summary on which actually says the following statements. That positive steps to improve financial resilience since the best value notice was issued. That there have been positive steps to improve the financial resilience since the best value notice was issued. BCP will manage its spending effectively within budget in 23-24 and set a balanced budget for 24-25 with projected balanced MTFP covering the 4-year period to March 28. In addition, they also said that member and officer understanding is clearer, and that there is new political leadership to prioritise financial resilience. You know, I'm obviously quite pleased that they've recognised the progress that we've made in the last year. Finally, I'd like to really highlight the elephant in the room in terms of BCP's ability to continue, and that is the ongoing and increasing deficits related to the provision of SEND and the continuing underfunding of the DSG. It would be the easiest thing in the world for us to bury our heads in the sand and ignore it, but given that particularly given that councils up and down the country are faced with the same problems, and I think many people are again sticking their heads in the sand and just hoping that the new government will do something about it. We have not done that. We have proactively written to the government and proposed some ideas about how this could be tackled. We've also set out meaningful, and we've also yet to have a meaningful dialogue back from them, but we hope that when things have settled in just a little bit, that might happen. I have also written to all our new MPs and one old one and offered briefings in an effort to establish a cross-party consensus that we can take to the government on BCP's behalf. I think that just about sums it all up. Maybe the Director of Finance may want to add to that.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Cox. And Adam Richins, our Chief Financial Officer, is shaking his head. So we can go straight to members for questions, I think. Okay, members, you've had the papers for a while. Do we have any questions? Okay, I'll kick off then. If there wants to volunteer, you have some. Okay. In talking to the MTFP, I've got a few questions, so I'll go through them one by one if that's okay.
Yeah.
On the MTFP, paragraph 4, it talks about the rebase of the 24-25 budget to reflect the ongoing variations that occurred in the final quarter. Now I'm assuming that reflects the freeze on expenditure. No, could you just enlighten me on that, please, Mr. Richards?
Yeah, what we've got a habit of doing as relatively new council is looking at the financial outcome for the year and comparing it to our previous forecasts and analysis, particularly in that final quarter, because 3/4 of the year we'd undertaken. We've just set the budget for the year ahead, and we've done that based on set of assumptions and projections. So if there are some variances in that final quarter that perhaps we didn't expect, we then reflect about, okay, does they give us flexibility into the future to potentially rebase the budget? And I think as the paper outlines, there were some movements when it came to long-term conditions and learning disability packages for adult social care cases. And that's given us a little bit of ability to, if you like, adjust the budget for 24-25 and potentially hopefully future years, to help try and maintain that equilibrium.
Okay, thanks. I have to say I welcome the sensitivity analysis that you put into the report. I think that's very useful. I can't recall seeing that before, but was that as a result of the CIPFA recommendations?
I think the answer to that is no, in the sense that, we have played with sensitivity analysis before and undertaken projects. I can remember when Councillor Beasley was leader of Bournemouth, I think we did something similar, within Bournemouth's budget process. So it is something we've done at appropriate stages. As the portfolio holder outlined, we are in a slightly unusual position because we start the process towards setting a budget for 25-26 with a balanced budget for 25-26, and it's about maintaining that equilibrium. So if things happen, we need to be prepared for the things that go against the assumptions that we previously made, and clearly with a new government there could be some significant changes to those assumptions. So it's planning for the worst, hoping for the best, hopefully sensible financial planning and prudence.
Okay, I'll just ask one more and then I'll hand over. The GSG accumulated deficit, this has been like the sword of Damocles hanging over the council now for years and years. It must be, I don't know, is it 10 years? I remember the time when we're able to put sufficient into the reserves to cover the cost of it. And now, you know, year after year, we talk about it. There's been all sorts of initiatives to try to resolve it. And now the problem has got to such an extent that it could bring bankruptcy to the council. And there's some very, you know, quick action on behalf of the government is taken. And, you know, clearly, you know, this is as a result of the government not recognising the difficulty it was putting on local authorities. But, you know, I'm just wondering, it's no end in sight for this particular situation. It's been dealt with by various administrations over, must be 10 years. And it's quite horrendous, you know, the level of debt now. I see that you've written to the Secretary of State or whoever it was to try to resolve it. But is there no indication from anybody about how they might handle this or how we might be expected to handle it? But clearly it's beyond and there's something, you know, horrendous to council tax happens and we've got to then make up the money in some way. But is there no light at the end of the tunnel on this?
I can't promise you light at the end of the tunnel. You know, what I can promise you is that, you know, as officers, we take the position very seriously. You know, and clearly I've written to the Director of Finance at what was, you know, Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities to seek their guidance on how to deal with the issue that I run out of cash during 25-26 based on all available projections in order to pay and finance temporarily that DSG deficit. And as you said, by the time we go into 25-26, we're going to be looking at a deficit that is over £91 million. You say it quickly, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but £91 million. And by the end of that year, we'll probably be in excess of £116 million. So, you know, it's quite easy to see that, you know, based on all available reserves and temporary sources of finance, you know, how we're going to run out of cash, you know, during that period. So, you know, the purpose of the letter was to seek government's guidance on how to navigate this tricky issue. It has been shared with the Local Government Association, with SIPFA as part of that process. And as I set out in the report, I think the leader of the council wrote to the Secretary of States for DLUC and DFE based on the motion that was put to council earlier in the year. So hopefully, you know, we're in that period where hopefully things will settle down. And then we can start moving with regards to a real consideration on what the way forward actually looks like.
Just one last point on that. Could you give some idea of what it costs us to fund or finance this overspend? It must be several hundreds of thousands per annum, I would imagine.
I think, sorry, I deferred to the portfolio holder.
No, I was just going to say,
sorry Mike.
£4 million as far as I'm aware.
So there's £4 million worth of
Lost interest
payment that the council taxpayer picks up because it has to payroll the overspend basically.
Yeah, but in other words,
what difference would that make to council tax?
Well, I think we looked at it a slightly different way in the sense that when you looked at setting the 24-25 budget, that was 4 million of the £38 million of savings that could have been avoided. You know, the potential rationalisations of services, cuts, whatever language you want to use, 4 million of that 38 could have been avoided if we didn't have to finance this deficit during 24-25.
Okay, thanks. I've just got one more that I'd like to raise, and I'll on the there was somewhere in the code, I can't remember exactly where it was. It talked about the realisation of capital receipts, and it's talking about using some of that on future transformation. Now, I thought that we were in the last year of the transformation funding, but I noticed somewhere else in one of the reports that there's a suggestion of a further transformation programme. Could you just provide some clarification on that?
With regards to our transformation programme, you know, There are really two elements to it. One is the main transformation program, the one that we, if you like, kicked off in 2019. It's around about £50 million program, and that was very much focused on, producing and implementing a new ERP system, customer relationship management system, etc., etc. That program is the one that is gradually coming to an end, and during the course of this financial year, we should see that one almost come to its natural conclusion. But during this lifetime, what we've also done is start to gear up specific services transformation. What we've seen is council has already agreed, and agreed quite some time ago, to a transformation of children's services. And that will deliver a savings that are factored into the medium-term financial plan. What Cabinet will be looking at tomorrow, as part of the papers going forward to Cabinet, is the transformation of adult social care. And again, what we should see is that should deliver savings into the future, that will enable, if you like, that return on that investment, of that capital receipts. So as one sort of that comes to an end, the other ones start to potentially, grow as part of that process. Clearly nothing like the size of the original program, because they're very specific to those service areas, but that will mean that going beyond the 31st of March 2025, we will be using forecast capital receipts to finance our transformational program. And that's the approach we will continue to take.
Thank you. Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, really just wanting to get a little bit more information to understand better how things work. I just wanted to ask, with the company, the bit on company outturns, I'm not sure I'm quite clear on how the companies actually fit in with the council in terms of the way the finance flows. And my first sort of thing that I was wondering is, if they make a profit, where does it go? Does it come back to the council? Does it stay with the company forever? And also, if they did happen to make a loss, where would that go, and how would it work? And how do these companies' finances actually affect the council's finances?
Did you want to come in on that, Councillor Cox? I know that you indicated just now as well. Sorry.
I was just indicating to do with the DSG, really. I just felt I wanted to emphasise a point on that, but not necessarily on that question.
Okay. Did you want to take this particular question, or should I give it to Mr. Richards?
Oh, I think Mr. Richards will be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, I think, we're very clear, first of all, with regards to these companies, that under the best value notice, that there was an element of improvement around the governance, of the companies that we had to undertake. That was clearly set out as part of the action plan for the best value notice, and we are on an ongoing programme to improve that. Some significant, work has been done, and in all of that was the reference into BCP Future Places Limited, but significant progress has been made. With regards to, as companies, those are the only vehicles, that the council can operate that can generate a profit, and then that profit can then be used, and put towards, if you like, the council and subsidising the council. However, for the directors of that company, the decision to make first before you consider that process, and that would be, whether or not that they need to retain some of that earnings for their future operation, for their future development, for their future service improvements of the company as an entity in its own right. With regards to the performance, of the companies last year, and this is the point where I will defer to the Assistant Director of Finance, Nicola Webb, who might be able to take you through the relevant part of the report if you require it.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. So, Nicola.
Hi there.
Hello
Okay.
there.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer these. Each of the companies is set up really for a different purpose. And as Adam said, they do return a dividend to the council. And that's how the council recognises the contribution from the company to the overall general fund performance. So Tricuro was primarily set up for adult social care. And the main purpose of that is to keep costs low for that service. So most of they're not profits as such. I mean, it does make profits and it does retain some earnings, but the main purpose is to reduce the cost for the council through its contract for the adult social care services. The Seascape Group was set up for two purposes. One was for managing homes for rent, and again it's heavily involved with the council in terms of the properties are purchased, and then the council makes available the properties for the service to generate the tenants and the rents. And Seascape Group, the Seascape South is largely involved with the disabled facilities grants, again heavily linked with the social care service, and returns a very small contribution through a dividend to the council. And then Bournemouth Building and Maintenance Limited effectively manages a lot of the maintenance for the housing revenue account. So all the companies are delivering for our services. They're the better way of managing costs, and reasonably safe companies in terms of, because member mentioned about losses. Most of them are, say, the council's the customer, so you haven't got the worry about the sales, the marketing, and a dip in the market and all of those good things. So they're reasonably safe from that point of view. But yes, in terms of the governance, Mr. Richards mentioned the governance review, so it has been a bit tightened up. They all did have their own boards, their own board of directors who make the decisions, obviously with an eye to what the council would want those decisions to be. Happy to take any more questions, Chair.
Okay, I think that's and actually just one very quick thing, maybe yes or no. Am I right in thinking then that when it says profit, because mostly these companies are working for us in the council, when it says profit, what it really means is that they've spent under the amount that we've given them, so they can give some back. Is that right?
Broadly, yes. Yes, there are some third-party customers, but they're relatively small in the scheme of things. Most of the business is with the council.
Thank you, Nicola. Okay, thank you. Councillor Broadhead, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just had a quick question on the outturn, and in particular what that means going forward. And like you, Chairman, I think it's always good to see an underspend in the outturn. It has been something that's happened within this council for a number of years. We've got £7 million underspend this year. I think last year, depending on how you calculate it, was either 10 or 19 million underspend or surplus, whatever we want to call it. And I think it's always helpful to be on that side rather than at the end of the year where things are the other way around. I know a lot of that, and it is referenced in the report, is the new finance system that the authority has, which is much more reactive and fleet of foot. We can get up-to-date information now, which has been something that's held us back for some time. And the portfolio holder has very clearly outlined that a number of the reason for this year's underspend is because of the well-being, the social care packages that weren't necessary, which is always very, very difficult to judge. But that's £11.4 million of underspend this year. And then he mentioned that actually in terms of the delivery of the savings for last year, there was 94% kind of success rate in terms of savings delivery. So I just wonder, when we look to this year's budget, there was an optimism bias reserve that was put in the budget of £5 to £6 million. And I think a lot of the reasoning for that was, I think, the fluidity of outturns previously, alongside the questioning of whether the authority could keep managing the pace of savings that they have done before. Considering those savings seem to be on track, I just wondered whether the portfolio holder could say what his view was on the necessity for that optimism bias reserve going forward. Is it better to keep it there for the rest of the year, or is there some thinking that you're on track and you might not need it anymore? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Cox?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a fair question, to be honest, but I just wanted to pull Phil up on one thing. They're not surpluses. That we haven't generated any surpluses. What we've done is to reduce the drawdown from reserve. So I don't want anybody to be under any belief that we are generating surpluses. We haven't. All we've done is there's £30 million been taken from reserves every year, and all that's happened is that we've taken less than we'd budgeted for. Now, I don't call that surplus, but I call that less of a deficit. But no, it's a fair question as to whether the optimism bias provisions are there. I think they're still very much needed. In terms of what's happening in the current year, There are pressures in certain departments, and children's is clearly one of them, that we will have to be looking at very carefully. If you'd gone to the children's briefing yesterday, you will see there's some fantastic work going on in terms of turning children's services around from an inadequate position only a few years ago to hopefully good, but that is requiring significant investment, and unfortunately, as you can see from the current or from last year's 23-24, there was an overspend in that department against budget, and in the current year that trend seems to have continued. So I am I would be extremely reluctant to reduce that provision, because I think, based on what we know so far, and it's less, just over 3 months, that may be needed.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Any other members? Okay, I've got a couple more, if you don't mind. One of the items of risk in the report was that of Carter's Quay. And I think the comment in the report was the council would try to ensure it introduces a level of doubt. What was that about? I think it was basically saying that there still is a level of doubt. The way the report is talking about, I think we were sort of on the assumption that there was effectively a mortgage over the property, and that would automatically come to the council because it had title to the land deed effectively. But the report is not quite as categoric as that, and I'm just wondering if that's introducing a level of doubt over the position of the council with regard to Carter's Quay. The other element about that is how much is it costing the council at the moment, because they've given, I don't know if we already borrowed the full amount for the development, but we certainly paid around £15 million towards it up front. And I think it was a £45 million project. I don't know if we borrowed all that money in one go, but it's obviously a cost of borrowing implication which could go on for a long time. So if somebody could just comment on what I've said there, how risky is this for us, and what is it costing us in terms of payment on borrowing? So Richard, thank you.
With regards to, because I think you referred to the risk section of the report, and in there, I've highlighted, what are the current salient risks that we need to have due regard to. The reference on Carter's Quay is really the same as it was in February of this year when we set the budget for 24-25, in the sense that the council continues to have a dialogue with the administrators with regards to try and protect the council's investment in that asset. So we are in, from a financial perspective, in the same position as we were in February, but the dialogue continues. Clearly, as you quite rightly point out, we would have to cash flow that £15.3 million, and the temporary cash flow, the current rates are at least 5%, so that would give you the kind of indication as to what the current cost to the council is of that position. Ultimately, I think we hope still to turn it into a viable business case, which will hopefully then create additional homes for our community, or homes that we rent and get a return, in order to make that that investment something that is viable and worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richards. I don't get a warm feeling about it, to be honest. One would have thought that an administrator would have had a clear position on title to that particular development, but obviously it's more complex than one would think, and that's, I think, after this amount of time in particular, it doesn't. I'm not filled with confidence, to be honest with you, but there's nothing more. I understand nothing more can be said at the moment. Unless Councillor Cox wants to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to re-emphasize what the Director of Finance just said, that whenever you get a liquidator involved in any case like this, it will drag on for years. And sadly, that there's going to be a continuing cost to the budget for the interest lost, but it does breed uncertainty, unfortunately. But I think we are where we are at the moment, and we're obviously trying to protect the council's interests as much as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. So just one, somebody's already mentioned the ERP system that's been introduced, and the report touches on the fact that introducing a new system does introduce a bit of a learning curve and some folks in the system or whatever. But the system's been in place now, I think, for a few months, and I'm just wondering what progress we are on towards getting the dashboards, the ERP dashboards available, so we can all see what the system is actually offering us. How mature is the system now? Is it still giving problems? Are the directors able to use it in a useful way now? Is the investment proving of benefit? Mr. Richards?
Yeah, I think, as we try to identify within the risk section of the report, clearly any new system, you do get those periods of learning and you get those glitches, and it is right to say that we went through that this time last year as we started to deal with that system on back of everything we've had to then deal with since becoming a unitary authority. However, since then, I think there have been some quantum leap forwards, with regards to the quality of information that we're getting from the system, with regards to managers' interface into the system, because as from a financial perspective, previously we used to take a lot of information out of the system and send it to managers. Now we've got that self-service kind of approach where we don't provide anything, hence the savings in accountancy, because actually the managers will be going in and getting that information from themselves from the system. So hopefully a completely change of emphasis as part of that process. But I think it's a huge leap forward. I think if you talk to the managers, some of them around the table, they hopefully can echo the fact that it's actually a lot more positive than what they used to get, and actually hopefully it's helping them deliver services into the future.
Thank you. Councillor Broadhead?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just one more question for me, and it's slightly more high level, because obviously, although we're talking about finance papers here, our job is not just to count the beans, but also to look at the delivery of service for our residents. And there's always a so what question that I think with these, and making sure that we are focused on that as well. One of the things that struck me in the SIPFA report was their kind of comparator section, where it looks at our neighbouring councils that have a similar demography to us, etc., and how we compare to them. And what's quite striking in that section is that it mentions that on a per head basis, we spend the lowest level on services per head than any of our other comparator authorities. Now, it then makes clear that a lot of that is because we now spend 75% of our council expenditure on education, adult services, and children's services. But we are very far away from a lot of our comparator authorities on what we're spending on highways and transport. We're in the 43% less than the average, and of course we've seen reduced spending in areas like regeneration, etc. So I just wonder what the cabinet members' thoughts are. I fully appreciate and completely concur that we need to have a long-term balanced position, but elsewhere in the SIPFA report it also does say don't lose track on investing in some things and having a balanced risk portfolio that isn't just a closed shop and just look at the beans. So I wonder at what stage the portfolio folder might think that it start to look at investing in some of these areas rather than as being the bottom of the pile.
That's a very interesting question, Councillor Broadhead, and I'll explain why in a minute. But Councillor Cox?
Yeah, sure, and a very fair question. But investing in services is what we're all about, really. I think across party we're all about investing in services and making sure we do the most for the residents as we can. At the moment, though, when you look at the comparatives, we're spending an awful lot more money on adult social care than the neighbouring authorities, and we've got to be looking at making sure that we can tighten our belts in that respect. But in terms of children's services, because the service became sort of poor in this area, we're having to invest significant amounts of services in children's services. And I think, as the Director of Finance said, we're also reinvesting in adult social care in terms of transformation to bring that cost down. You know, nobody wants to spend money on services that directly affect the residents more than I do. And as soon as we can reasonably do that and keep our head above water, then we will do it. But at the moment, I have to say my particular focus is stabilising the ship, and I think we have stabilised it, but it's still in a very weak position, which is what I said in my report earlier. And the stronger we can get that, I think there's a balance. You know, as Councillor Broadhead said, there's a balance to be had, and we would like to certainly invest in filling more potholes and getting other stuff done for residents. But at the moment, we're keeping our head above. We're concentrating on keeping our head above the water.
Okay, so
Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Can I come back, Chair? Look, and thank you, Councillor Cox. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that the one comeback I would make is that it doesn't have to be presented as a binary choice. And I'll give you an example. Within the report, it points out that in terms of levels of borrowing for things like capital borrowing and infrastructure, we are, you know, quite far down the list compared to a lot of other councils. And, you know, there have been many examples in not just in this council but others, whereby you can invest in these things by looking at some capital-based solutions. So is there any kind of, and it even says that in the SIPFA report, you know, maybe look a little bit more closely at how you can invest in some services to save as well. And I just wonder what your thoughts are, because I completely understand that the focus has to be and should be on presenting a balanced budget, but are we not missing a trick a little bit in using some capital expenditure in that regard?
I don't think we are. I don't think we are at the moment. You know, in terms of borrowing, my concern at the moment is the cash that we're having to subsidise the DSG on, and so, you know, we are actually at the moment we have certainly over the last year been spending significant amounts of money in buying back houses so that we can calm down the homelessness position, and saving money on that the particular angle. So we are spending money, and we are spending money in order to save the council money in order to then reinvest that in services. So that is happening. It's probably not happening as quickly as I would like, as Councillor Broadhead would like. It's probably you know, maybe if there are instances that, you know, I would always be happy to look at projects where that might happen and that it's a win-win situation. But at the moment, we don't really have the cash resources to invest very much, because of the position we're in with DSG, I think.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cox. Okay, just one more from me. When if I can clear my head and get this right, but this year's budget effectively, or the outturn for last year's budget, was very successful. Let's face it, you know, a really good result. I think we ought to be very pleased about that. But some of that was a product of a moratorium on expenditure in certain areas.
What I said. Yeah.
Sorry?
Which is what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm wondering about how that then affects the budgeting going forward, because we are, I believe, in another moratorium currently. So what I'm saying is, does this mean that we are going to establish next year's budget on the basis of the lower costs that we've achieved by having a moratorium effectively over 2 years for good parts of the year? You know, it's driven the cost down significantly. So does that mean that we can expect the same level of services, you know, that we currently got? Because some things are not the statutory areas. I'm talking about the other bits, you know, the other 25% of money that we've got left to spend on everything else. where those areas have definitely taken a bit of a decline, and I think people are generally commenting about the condition of the town, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Is that what we can expect going forward?
Well,
Cox?
I'm hoping not. I have proposed a few months ago, actually, that we lift the moratorium department by department, depending on how ironed in they are with achieving their savings. So, you know, just to give you an example, I think I won't name names, but one particular department is less than 5% of achieving its savings for last year, and therefore I'm hoping that department will be able to, the moratorium will be able to be lifted in that department, whereas another department is struggling with I think it's struggling to get 70%, so it's 30% short of its savings, which is a significant number. So we've got to be very careful. But what I would like to do is to release it department by department, if only as an incentive for that department, and particularly the department, shall we say, that is very close to achieving its savings is one that residents will see the benefits of if we lift a moratorium. So I think, does that answer your question?
I'm not sure it does, but
Right.
I won't press you any
Or
further.
maybe
on
Adam will.
Mr. Richards.
Yeah, I think it's just to reiterate what the portfolio holder said, or intimated as part of that response, was just because, on a temporary basis we haven't spent something on an item of expenditure in, say, 23-24, it doesn't mean that the budget will be permanently abated going forward. It doesn't mean that. Clearly, if we've got difficulties in balancing a budget, and what we've already highlighted is we do start the year with a balanced budget for 25-26, but should those assumptions change, then clearly it gives us something to revisit, but it doesn't mean that that budget's permanently abated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards. Okay, so members, Councillor Salmon.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, just a follow-on question about the department by department lifting on the freeze. How will we know about that when that happens? Will that because I'd like to know when the department is told they can spend a bit more freely. I'd quite like to know when that happens.
How will we know, Councillor Cox? There'll be
I'm
money
sure.
floating everywhere, presumably.
There won't be money floating everywhere, but there might be a freeze. I'm sure it will be. Certainly, the department will be the first to know, and I'm sure it will be announced from there on in. I've no doubt my colleagues will be keen to make sure that everybody knows when it happens.
Mr. Richards is indicating. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, to be clear, I'm an officer and I provide advice. My advice to the portfolio holder will be to wait until he's seen the Q1 budget monitoring for this year, because he's already indicated that we have some pressures before he makes that bold step. And that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, please. Yeah, Councillor Aikenhead.
Yeah, I have a supplementary question on that as well. It just gives me a little bit of concern, so I'd just like a bit of clarification about what we're saying about if we're going to start lifting the freeze on the budgets. Are we really saying that this is going to depend totally on how well a department does their budgets, or should we really be taking into account also which services are more important to the residents?
It'll be the former. It'll be how well they're achieving the savings which they've all signed up for. Each department has signed up for a number of savings. They've come up with them. I haven't come up with them. And if they're achieving them, then that's good. And we can move forward. I don't want to be seen to say that there's going to be a massive lifting of of the restrictions, because there's one department that's particularly close, but we've got to look at the whole budget in total, and we've got to make sure that we're going to be on track to make sure we've got a balanced budget in total. But providing there's reasonable success everywhere, then we should, in my opinion, we should allow certain departments to have their restrictions lifted when we're happy that the council's in good nick. But to answer your question directly, no, each department is responsible for their budgeted savings, and so they've got to tackle that before going forward. And you could argue that we've all got particular departments which we think are more important than other departments, but that's quite often a matter of opinion. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it makes sense.
No, I know. I didn't think you would.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yeah, sorry to come back in again, but I think Councillor Aikenhead makes a really good point. I think we should challenge a portfolio holder on that reasoning, because, to paraphrase, I think that the question was quite the right question. I said earlier on that it's not just about the finances, it's about the so what, it's about the delivery of services. And the question was, should you not reward, but when you're looking at the stop and freeze of infrastructure, should it be led by who's the best at doing the savings, or should it be driven by where is the demand coming from? Where are the areas that we do need to be putting extra time and effort to deliver the service for our residents? And the portfolio holder quite clearly says the former rather than the latter. Do we not think it should be more nuanced, in that we should take a step back and say, right, if we don't have to have that very, very strict freeze on expenditure anymore, it should be focused on the areas where the most utility can be derived for the residents, rather than just who's the best at saving stuff.
Mr. Richins.
Well, I'm hoping that the portfolio holder might respond to the direct question, but I just wanted to highlight and point out that before we get into a conversation about whether or not we should lift the expenditure freeze, we have to deal with the elephant in the room. We've already discussed the eye-watering deficit we have on DSG, and we've got to have some kind of answer and direction and travel on that before we actually consider lifting the expenditure freeze. But that would be my advice to council anyway.
Councillor Cox, did you wish to add to that? No,
I think that's very sensible advice. But to answer the Councillor Aikenhead's question, and followed up by Councillor Broadhead, no, if you've got a directorate or a directorate that is moving heaven and earth to make sure that they pull in their savings, providing everything is fine in the rest of the council, then they should be rewarded by being able to do what they want to do. Otherwise, if you're going to reward failure, i.e. failure to deliver your budgets, which you've signed up for in the first place, then that's the the road to hell, as far as I'm concerned, from a financial perspective, because there's no incentive to make sure that you deliver those budgets. So those budgets, which they've all, again, I repeat, each department has signed up for. They signed up for last year. They've got to produce those and make them happen. And if you're not going to reward departments that do that, then I think that's a bad track to go down.
So I feel there's something there that I just feel that quite uncomfortable about, particularly about the principle of rewarding departments by giving them extra leeway and how they spend their budgets, when actually all of the departments are working for the council and should be working to the council's priority. And I completely agree with what Adam Richins was saying, that we shouldn't even be considering releasing out people to do what they want with the budget if we've still got really big deficits. But at some time in the future, when we do, I feel that the administration really need to keep a much tighter control on what needs to be done with the budget in terms of residents' wishes. So I think I would just like to really move from that. This committee really just advises the cabinet to remember the priorities of our residents and to take them as more important as the priorities of the individual departments and the performance of departments. If a department performs well, that should be reflected in their appraisals and how well they're doing their job, not in how much budget they get to play with.
It's not a matter of, it's not, I'm sorry, Councillor Aguinaldo, you're wrong. It's not a matter of how much your these departments get extra. It's not extra. This is just actually per their budget. They're allowed to spend what has been budgeted for, and therefore we're releasing. All I have suggested is that we're releasing a freeze on any extra expenditure. So, and I think that perfectly, if a department's, if a department or a director is performing well on that, I think they should, that department should be rewarded for it. Every department every department is important for the council in their own way, and therefore, we can argue till the cows come home in terms of what's the most important and should we be chucking more money into that particular area, but actually, what we need to do is to make sure that the whole finances of the council are in a stable position, which is what I'm attempting to do, and what so far we've successfully done over the last year. So I think in terms of where we're going forward, it's the right way. We're not spending money willy-nilly. We're not spending money until it's absolutely there to be spent, and when it is there to be spent, it'll be spent on the priorities of the council and the priorities of the residents.
Yeah, so what I'm moving is that we should not be piecemeal, bit by bit, releasing departments from having their budgets frozen. We should be waiting till we are in a good financial position and then unfreezing the ones that are more important to residents first, rather than the ones that happen to be managing their budgets better. And that's what I'm moving.
You have a seconder for your move?
Sorry, Joe, could I just query what Councillor Aitken actually is saying there? If all things are equal and two departments have managed their budgets well, and presumably what you're saying is that they are totally equal, but one could be released before the other because it is more resident facing than the other one, which could be more back services, behind the scenes services. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that?
I'm not saying resident facing. I'm saying that the council needs to be taking a view on what is most important and using that to prioritise, rather than prioritising departments that are managing their budgets better.
The issue that I have with this, Councillor Aikenhead, is that the residents through us have already approved the budget, and all that's happening at the moment is it's a moratorium on expenditure, just to make sure that we deliver the budget and the outturn is favourable. I haven't seen the outcome from last year. My own feeling is that we do have confidence in the way that the budget is being managed, and it's being managed in a way that will look to secure the MTFP, and that is the overriding concern. When it comes to the prioritisation of services, we will do that in the budgeting process for this year, for next year, sorry, and that budgeting process will be starting very shortly. And in fact, I've been asked to remind members that we all have a training session available to us on the 29th of July, and we're all asked to attend. So it could be very important, and that's where I see the prioritisation taking
okay.
place, and that's the way I see it. I've seen a few people nodding, and I think, whilst you're not totally comfortable with that, the other thing, of course, is there is no mechanism, I don't believe, for asking us or the residents effectively, can we release, allow that department to release a bit now? That's the job for management to decide. Councillor Broadhead.
Yes, so I can understand what you're saying, Chairman, that the appropriate place for that kind of forward-looking prioritisation is budget setting. But this whole conversation is about what happens outside of the budget setting process. And if there is a movement on the restriction of any new spending, there seems to be an ideological difference between a siloed approach, which is which is performing best and they get rewarded. And I think what Councillor Aikenhead is saying, which is a more corporate, cross-council approach led by the priorities of actually maybe services that do need a little bit more help and input. Maybe it's cleaning streets, maybe it's things that deem to be important. I think ultimately it's probably maybe a bit premature to be saying right now what that approach should be, because as we've heard from the Chief Financial Officer, a very heavy warning not to spend the money until you've seen the first quarter report. But in principle, I do agree with the sentiment of the motion. I think it's something that we'll keep an eye on going forward, because I like Sue, I fundamentally disagree with the idea that if you are stopping that moratorium on spending, that it should be led by who's performing the best rather than what services are most important to people.
Thank you, Councillor Roddick. But of course, on the other hand, it was up to the management to actually decide that the moratorium would go ahead. That was their decision, and it should be their decision also to, if they wish to stop it for whatever reason. Mr. Richards.
Sorry, Chair, just to correct you slightly, in the sense it was a council decision because it was part of the council budget report for 24-25 around that moratorium. No, I totally agree with Councillor Broadhead with regards to my recommendation. There is nothing in either of these two reports that talks about the expenditure freeze by way of a recommendation. As Councillor Broadhead pointed out, probably best wait till the Q1 budget monitoring report comes forward, as it will do as part of the September cycle, and see what that says, and whether or not it mentions anything with regards to the expenditure freeze before you then talk about actually what steps you might take. So totally clear with Councillor Broadhead on that. But just to emphasise my advice with regards to all of this, it feels a little bit premature when we've got such a huge deficit for DSG, which has to be our priority for resolving before we start talking about lifting expenditure freezes, and what order we might do that in. The DSG deficit has to be the priority for this council first.
So I am happy to withdraw my motion on the basis that, though I was a little alarmed by what the portfolio holder was saying, I recognise we're not in a position to do it now anyway, so the motion wouldn't really be relevant.
Okay, members, I think we'll draw this to. You always do this, Councillor Salmon. Go on.
I'm really sorry. I just wanted to bring it back around then to we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, the DSG deficit and the letter and the lack of response, just because it was touched on earlier, but I'd like to be really clear. We haven't had much in the way of a response to this letter. I'm guessing that's got something to do with the fact that we've just had a general election. We're presumably expecting a response. Do we have any sense of a time frame on that?
Mr. Richards.
I think the answer to that is no, in the sense that we have talked about allowing this government time to bed in, to understand the scale of the issues it faces, and then hopefully we'll get a response from that. It's unfair to say we've had no response because they have contacted the Chief Exec just to talk around some of the issues, but it wasn't by way of a formal letter or anything by way of a response at that stage. So they're aware of the issue. I think that by way of the civil servants. Clearly they're going to be having conversation with the new ministers, and hopefully, we can start to see some direction of travel.
Thank you. Okay, members. Well, I think we'll wind this one up now. There were a number of recommendations to the cabinet in here, but just to summarise, it looks like we have a good outturn for last financial year. We've now got more involvement of members for the oncoming budgeting process, which is what members wanted, and that's now built into a new process for next year's budget. I have to say that the CIPFA report was extremely good and very useful. It's good to see it's being actioned. A number of recommendations. If no one's got any disagreement with those recommendations, wishes to alter any of them, I think, well, if you're all in agreement, we'll move on from that, and we don't have any further recommendations for cabinet. That would be my view anyway. So, are we okay? All right, then we'll move on. Okay, thank you. Useful. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Goodman. Right, it's just 1:07. So our next item is Hannah. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, our next item is pay and reward, an update on introducing the new terms and conditions of employment. So we'll ask our portfolio holder for transformation, Councillor Hannah, and with him this evening, I understand we've got Sarah Dean, Director of People and Culture, and Liz Bowman.
We don't have Liz.
Liz is not here. Okay, all right. Thank you, Councillor Hannah.
And thank you, Chair. Can I say, first of all, that this has been very much an officer-led process. So I will allow Sarah Dean to provide you with the detail of the background. But what I would want to say is, although the report looks like a relatively brief report, there is an enormous amount of work that has been undertaken by Sarah and her team. And I would like to thank her for her continuing work on that. And for keeping the leader and myself abreast of what is taking place. Can I also say that as an administration, we are keen to see this settled as soon as possible. We obviously greatly value all of our staff and the work that they undertake for us and for residents. We know that there is a certain amount of frustration that what we hoped for as an earlier date for implementation has had to be postponed. We can understand that frustration, but we also hope that we can be grateful for patience as continuing negotiations take place. And we are indeed grateful to our staff for all that they do. With that said, I think it's for Sarah to provide the detail of the background and the current situation and the way forward. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah.
Thanks, Sarah.
So good evening.
Welcome.
Obviously the background to the information is in the report provided. Would you like me to take you through a summary of that? Or
I think we will all have read the report, unless there's anything you want to add to it, just to highlight, then we can just move straight into questions.
Very happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, members, we all had the report. Has anybody got any questions on it? No. Okay. Wow. Shocked and stunned. Yeah. Yeah. Go on then. I think the Chief Executive seemed to be champing at the bit here to say a few words. No, yes.
I just first wanted to ask, so what happens next? How are you going to resolve it?
Is that one for the Chief Executive? Sarah.
Really good question. Thank you. So we're in the process, as you'll see in the paper, we've agreed to release the pay outcomes so that staff have sight of their own individual pay outcomes. That's the information that we were given as a result of feedback from the trade unions that our colleagues wanted. And we're hoping then, once we've released the information, that both of the trade unions will move to undertake a third ballot of their members, which obviously we are hopeful will be a favourable result in order to allow us to move forward through to implementation. So yeah, we're just we're waiting really for that next stage in the process to happen before.
just kind of wondered, was there any way that this could have been done quicker? Did they give any indication they needed this information in the first place? Well, have we learned any things that would make us do it differently next time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that our colleagues have asked me too. And you know, I think hindsight is a great thing. What I would say is we did take the time to consider and discuss with the trade unions and ourselves as a project team around the process steps that we would follow in order to get to a collective agreement with the trade unions. And obviously part of that we took to consider about the timing of when we would release the pay information. I sought advice from my colleagues in other South West councils to seek to understand the processes and the process flow and steps that they too had gone through when undertaking job evaluation exercises. I also was aware of the process steps that both Bournemouth Borough Council and the Borough of Poole had undertaken when they'd gone through their own job evaluation exercises. And all of that led me to a decision to release the pay outcomes after the first ballot had taken place. I think what I would say is that the difficulty that we then experienced once the first ballot had been undertaken is that we had a split vote between each of the trade unions. So we had Unison that had voted in favour to accept the proposal and GMB that voted to reject. And we knew that any counter decision that we made at that time to release the pay outcomes would mean that we were in effect making the decision of the Unison members sort of null and void. And obviously at that stage, we were hoping still to achieve a favourable vote from GMB members by enhancing the offer and the proposal that we'd made. So it was a difficult time really in terms of influencing the decisions that we made at that stage.
No one else wants to ask any questions, so this is going to force me, unfortunately, to ask a few questions. And you know my views on several of the issues there, which I've been battling with over since last November, in fact. But and it hits on the point that Councillor Hannah made when he opened his remarks, when he said this has essentially been an officer-led process with very little democratic oversight. And I believe that is the case. And I believe this is the first time that I'm aware of that the pay and reward system has actually been updated to any of the democratic committees, which I find quite extraordinary, given that, you know, this is the biggest wage bill. It is, it's the main, this is where all our money goes. It goes on the services, but of course it's our people that are providing those services, and it's the wage bill behind it. And it's somewhere in the region of £230 million or thereabouts. And yet, you know, it's not, as far as I'm aware, it has, I agree, gone to the full council a budget, because when we voted on the budget, we effectively underwrote the new salaries that had been agreed as part of the negotiations, but we didn't know the detail of it. And so I've always felt a little uneasy personally that, you know, such an enormous issue could be dealt with so little effectively oversight from the democratic side of the council. Notwithstanding that, I'm very conscious of the sensitivities of the situation we are still in. And whilst I still have some very burning issues, which I'd like to raise publicly, I feel that I can't do that currently because you're still in negotiations with the unions. And I wouldn't wish to you know, get in the way of that. But you know my views already, and I think we'll leave it at that. Did you? Sorry, were you indicating Councillor Beasley? I thought you were. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, the comments you've just made, I completely understand and support. But I do appreciate this being a public meeting. It is very difficult, perhaps, to explore some of these issues any further. I have a little interest and a little bit of experience in these matters, and the way that we handled relations and negotiations in the former Bournemouth Council is somewhat different from what's being experienced at the moment. I am concerned, and you highlighted it a moment ago, with the vote from Unison. You then move on from there and you negate that process, and at the same time trying to achieve some kind of accommodation with GMB. And I'm sure members are fairly aware of the different types of services that those two unions represent within the council, and the impact that some of those might have were strike action to follow. What I would say, Chairman, in supporting what you said a moment ago, is two things, I think. The first is that there really should be a mechanism here whereby informally councillors are made aware of the current situation as these negotiations proceed. That can be done through group leaders, for example, and in a number of other ways. And secondly, that an update report should come back to this board at the next meeting, because things will have moved on by then. And in moving on, we need to be kept appraised of where we've got to in that. These are potentially very serious issues. We wish officers well in that process, but I really believe there should be far more democratic engagement in this. And that is my experience in the former Bournemouth Council. And as the then leader, I encouraged that because I felt it was important not only to all members, but also to the residents they represented in terms of the services going forward, that should things not work out quite as planned.
Thank you, Councillor Lucy. Councillor Hannah, would you like to comment on that? Mm-hmm. Mm. 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 Yeah, I think you may be right. I may have got that wrong, actually. Did I get that wrong?
Yes, Chair, just to confirm, you had an update. Well, it was to the Corporate Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so the predecessor of this board, nearly a year ago in June 2023.
Okay, thanks. So that was prior to any offer being made. Thank you.
So, Chairman, if I just add, we also had some member oversight in the sense we've been keeping the Cabinet informed through informal meetings with the Cabinet, which we have regularly, and we've done that, I think, fairly consistently for the last 5 years now, which has been the length of this process. It has been extremely long. I think everybody recognises that. It is a huge challenge getting a new pay structure in for 5,000 people with such a variety of professions engaged, and that is part of the challenge, isn't it? We're trying to get a single consistent grading structure for people that came from 4 preceding councils and a number of new appointments across that range of professions, and that's been the complexity that we've seen.
Sorry.
Yeah, just a quick question. Obviously, the new government's bringing in a bunch of new labour laws shortly. Are we aware of any of that potentially being detrimental to what you're trying to achieve with these pay negotiations currently?
Not at the moment. I mean, obviously, we're still very much hoping that we'll be able to get agreement with the recognised trade unions through this next stage that we're going through, and we can move forward to sign a collective agreement with the trade unions at that point. So that's very much where we're aligning ourselves to.
Anything else, members? No, okay. Well, we wish you well. This obviously is a key time for the workforce. From my understanding, it basically have gone back on our position about allowing people to understand where they would fit in the new pay structure. And it does seem that the pay structure itself has been accepted. It's just that individuals are uncertain where they will sit within it and how it will affect their own particular salaries. I can understand to a point why they would do that. But you know, I wish you well and hope that you can come to an agreement with the unions. And okay, thank you. The report is for information only, and unless anyone's got any recommendations, we'll close the debate at that point. Oh, Councillor Beasley, thank you.
Well, Chairman, I would appreciate an answer to my two suggestions. The first was that there were informally updates for group leaders, which seems to me to be a fundamentally sensible way of binding everybody together in this. And secondly, and I'm a relatively new member of this board, there may have been an update 12 months ago, but we're into different territory today. And I think it's essential there are regular updates in the public domain because it's part and parcel of the democratic process of the council. So those are the two suggestions I've made. I think they need to be encapsulated in a move, but I had hoped I might get a response from officers on it.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that one's for you, probably, is it?
Very happy to do that, Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. I'm, through you, Chairman, very grateful.
Thank you.
Yes, could you put your mic on? Apologies. Can I suggest, Chair, that the timing might be after the result of the two ballots that we anticipate once the indicative outcomes have been circulated, and that would be at some point end of September, October.
Sorry, the date. When are the dates of the next ballots? I'm sorry, I'm not aware of when they are. So,
Sarah?
So we've got indicative timings that we've agreed with the trade unions, but we haven't firmed those up yet. We are planning to release the pay information in mid-September to colleagues. The trade unions are keen for that information to land and make sure that all of our colleagues have received that information and had the opportunity to raise any questions or concerns with their managers before they begin to start the next ballot process. We're obviously mindful of our colleagues in schools too, who will be returning in September, and making sure that they've got time to get back into the school year and into the swing of things as they then receive their information and start the same challenges. So we have plans to firm up the arrangements with the trade unions in terms of the specific timings of the ballot actually this week. So I will know more then. But I think Councillor Hannah is quite kind of right in the point that he makes, because until we've gone through that process, there isn't really an update to give. We are waiting to follow that process. And at the moment, the team are just working really, really hard in the background to make sure that that information is ready to be released. So I think you're right, Councillor Hannah, that the next update is likely to be when we hit the next milestone and we've got something to update on here.
does that satisfy you, Councillor Beasley?
Yes, I think so, Chairman.
Thank you.
I'm as intent and as keen to see positive progress on this as anybody. My only intention is that there is proper information flow.
Thank you. Okay, members, we'll call a halt on that item. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. Unless anybody would like a comfort break, I would tend to move on, if that's all right. We'll plough on then, shall we? Okay. So now we have agenda item 10, the revised BCP seafront strategy. There is a seafront strategy which has been amended now, and I think that's what we're effectively looking at, is a change to or amendments to the existing strategy. And I believe this is going to be introduced by Councillor Milieu, who's the Deputy Leader of the Council, portfolio holder for Connected Communities, to introduce this paper. Oh, yes. We've also got Amanda Barry with us, Director of People and Culture. Hello, Amanda. Hi. Oh, sorry. Yeah, commercial operations. Yes, you're dead right.
That's a cut and paste error.
You want to change to yours? Sorry. And Gary Foyle, Seafront Development Manager. Good evening, Gary. So, Millie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're going to do obviously this is quite a big paper in general, but actually the changes that we want to make to it, and which is why it's here at committee today, aren't as extensive as maybe we might want to see if it was a new seafront strategy coming through, and that it's really important to recognise that this is not a full rewrite of a seafront strategy. It's also not a new seafront strategy. This is a response to some of the contextual changes that we have seen since April 2022, some rather big ones, to try and adapt the seafront strategy to meet the those changes, and so that it's operationally up to date and our officers can get on with the work that they actually need to do. I'm going to just introduce the paper, but then Gary actually has a presentation with him, and I wanted to check whether he's okay to do that later on, because I don't want to talk and then he can't. Is that all right?
Well, I mean, it could be an hour, but as we are slightly ahead of schedule, hopefully it's not too long.
How many slides, Gary?
There's 9 slides.
9.
Okay, well, we'll say yes, okay. But please be mindful of the timing. Thank you.
Thank you, and I really appreciate it, because one of the really sad things about looking at the seafront strategy on paper is that it doesn't really bring to life the amazing coastline that we have, and actually how impressive it is, not just as an asset, but as just a sunny environment that we're all able to enjoy. So hopefully we'll have some nicer pictures later on. Anyway, just going back to what I was saying, we do have this context change that we're working within, mainly around the financial landscape. So obviously we're all aware that the cost of borrowing has gone sky high. It means that capital projects are really difficult to deliver at the moment. Instead, the document kind of gives the go ahead to officers to look for investment elsewhere and to leverage that investment, which is then something we could potentially match through borrowing. And we've seen that recently. We've seen some really, really good private investment along our seafront into council buildings, into our assets. And we've also seen government investment with the £20 million levelling up fund. So it's really trying to look at how we can fund some of those capital projects without having to borrow, which is currently not an option for us. I think around that borrowing as well is that we are seeing huge inflation in construction, and we need to look more at how we work in partnership to deliver some big projects, big capital projects on the seafront, rather than taking it on ourselves. Another real key change is where we've had a shift in not just the politics, so a new administration, obviously, and a bit of a change from focusing on the commercial to more focusing on the community. We have this asset, but we also have a lot of responsibility for it, and we felt that it went a little bit too far in terms of commercialisation in the previous seafront strategy. It was very, very clear that it was a way to bring in income for the council, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think it just comes down to what extent we feel that is acceptable. So our view is to scale back on that a little bit, and actually if we're going to take that route, if we're going to commercialise, we need to do the due diligence and the process around it to make it legal. Those of you who came to Audit and Governance will have seen when I was presenting there about the changes that we're making in commercial operations and the events team around how we approach different commercial opportunities, so things like pop-ups. And that applies on the seafront pretty much more than anywhere else. So what it means is we've been looking at how we bring in the planning process, rather than having this ability just to go ahead and put stuff on the seafront. We actually need it to be a democratic process, and our corporate strategy reflects that, saying that we're an open, transparent and accountable council, putting our people at the heart of our services. So to overcome that governance think audit and governance described it as a governance failure, then we absolutely are committed to making sure that that takes place as it should. We also considered some of the key uses of our seafront as well, and to reflect the corporate strategy, we're keen to promote the use of the beach for health and well-being, also promote the amazing sports we have locally, you know, volleyball, life-saving, rowing, all of those kind of sports that can happen in our environment where we have wonderful calm seas and beaches. But we also want to focus on access and create the aspiration that the seafront should be mobility friendly. We should have accessible toilets. We should have beach access ways as well. And we can start marketing ourselves as the destination for people who are looking to travel somewhere where they know they're going to get the services they need if they have an access issue. The paper obviously goes on to identify some of the challenges and opportunities, and Gary's got some of those in his presentation, but I just wanted to come back to the recommendation. So it asks cabinets to approve the refreshed seafront strategy, but it also looks to delegate authority to the Chief Operations Officer and the portfolio holder to define event zones, which are, and I just wanted to explain this because it doesn't really, it's only a tiny little paragraph really in the papers. Really, at the moment, the seafront is taken in planning terms as one area, one place. And what we need to do is divide it up into specific individual locations. So they are distinctive areas with a distinct rules around how many events can take place there and how many and what's possible in terms of events. Basically, it just means then that from a planning point of view, we can break things down a little bit more rather than be caught by the fact that we have an event going on down in Sandbanks and it affects an event wanting to take place all the way up in Southbourne. We know they're very distinct, different locations, but in planning terms, they aren't. So this gives us that opportunity to redefine that side of it. Thank you, Chair. I'll pass over to Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm just going to share the presentation. Hopefully that will come up on the screen. So as Councillor Earl has already reiterated, it's really important for our seafront service and particularly my role within seafront development to have this strategy that really helps shape and drive the future direction of our service and also the daily work of our team. We originally started a consultation back in 2021. There were 4,000 individual engagements as part of that. And then the original strategy was adopted in 22. As Councillor Earl has pointed out, that has now been reviewed and refreshed. So there were further public engagement exercises carried out on the beach in 2023. And obviously we've been working with the Cabinet to develop this new version. The version that's on Appendix 1 of the report is, I must reiterate, in draft form. So it is obviously subject to potentially any changes from this evening and obviously a Cabinet tomorrow. The character areas that we originally referred to stayed exactly the same. So originally there were 15 distinct character areas set in 2022, and that hasn't changed. However, as Councillor has intimated, some of those character areas are quite large and might affect the way that events are. Certainly.
And we're not seeing this presentation on the live stream, so whilst we're seeing it, and to be honest, I'm having real difficulty even with my Ockham blinkers on.
So
seeing it, but please carry on.
Thank you.
But bear in mind that people listening in, that's all they're going to get in audio on this.
Yes. Share your window. If you have it open in Publisher,
okay,
and share the window rather than sharing it through Teams, then it will feed through.
Share the window within Teams.
If you go to, should I just?
So that one, I was opening it on Publisher, yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually sharing it there.
Yeah. If you share
that
and then open it in the slideshow in Publisher, it should put it through. If it doesn't, then
nope. That's not coming through. No. Shall I just talk through it? So apologies, Chair. The members all have copies of this, obviously, and the character areas that you were originally referring to just then, everyone's got that in their background paper, number one. So if you wish to zoom in further, you can do. So some of the key changes. The adopted vision statement back in 2022 basically focused on world-class seafront, prioritising the protection of our natural environment, responding to climate emergency. What we've seen in the change in 2024 is around the enhancement of our seafront and improving access, as Councillor Earl mentioned earlier, supporting sustainable, safe and healthy communities. So those are slight changes to the vision statement, but not fundamentally and certainly not wholesale. If we move on to the strategy objectives from 22, again, these have been updated and changed slightly to reflect the new priorities for the council. So working with partners to identify and deliver net biodiversity gain, which we know is a very important factor now, particularly with planning. Achieving carbon neutrality in 2022 was a target for 2050. That has now changed to 2045. Maintaining and enhancing a distinctive look and feel has changed more towards supporting our community pride in our public spaces. So some of those key changes, as I said, were quite subtle, quite slight. If we move on to the next page, some of the objectives from 2022 have been combined into one now. So delivering sustainable investment and unlocking the potential for new leisure attractions are now into one. And the emphasis is very much on unlocking the potential to encourage external investment, as Councillor Earl mentioned earlier. Back in 22, the emphasis was on maximising income to support council services, also benefiting the local community. That has now changed to maintaining income to support council services and enabling local communities to shape the services that matter to them and looking for new opportunities for income generation that respect the natural environment and enhance its beauty. And some have changed quite wholesale. So back in 22, celebrating and encouraging the increasing diversity of the seafront audience has changed more towards encouraging active, healthy and independent lives by removing barriers for all our communities to access the seafront. Particular focus on young people and those with disabilities. So you can see that the changes in some cases are very, very slight and very subtle, some more significant. Key opportunities, we've got a number of pipeline projects at the moment that have been in development, some for a number of years. And a short list that I went through there is around going from west to east, Sandbanks Pavilion. As we know, the infrastructure is in need of certainly some rebuilding work and possibly some renovation work. Camphor Cliffs Pavilion, equally in a similar position. Allenshine Cloisters is one of the levelling up projects we've been looking at in terms of a potential future regeneration scheme down there. The Durley Hub has now been delivered, but it's not quite delivering on the actual original intention of that project. So that's something that the team have been working on to start to really drive forward those outcomes. Happy Lands, as we know, the back of Happy Lands has a cliff area which has caused some concerns, so that needs to be addressed, and obviously the future of that building needs to be looked at in terms of its infrastructure. Both piers, Bournemouth Pier and Boscombe Pier, are currently subject to levelling up projects that we're working towards, and they're focused on regeneration and ensuring that we increase the lifespan of those structures. And also Mudderford and Highcliffe Beach have got individual projects looking at renovating some of the infrastructure down there. Again, these opportunities are really to encourage active lifestyles, as we said, unlocking potential investment and also enabling our local communities. Delivery of this, very, very simply, we've got central government funding in the form of levelling up, which we're delivering right now, and that's an ongoing project which hopefully will conclude in 2026. We've also got some projects which are funded by Community Infrastructure Levy, and that will obviously be ongoing with future bids potentially. But again, I think the thrust of a lot of our delivery is going to be around encouraging that external commercial investment and looking at some of our sites, particularly in terms of how we can work with key partners to take them forward. We obviously need to look at current trends and market forces that are shaping our coastline, which is why it's a constant evolution and a review process, and possibly even look at some longer term leases to encourage that investment and that investment criteria. We've obviously got to consider planning in all of this. That's a key component, and also any legal constraints that we have along the seafront in terms of land ownership as well. So, Chair, if that's okay, presentation concluded. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank. So members, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. I have 3 questions, if that's all right, but I can do 1 or 2 and then let others jump in if you like, Chair. So I think that the first question was around the kind of the zoning that we're talking about and the identifying event zones, and I think it's really welcome. I think one of the things we have come across, particularly post-pandemic, where we were trying to get more activity and encourage the tourism industry more. It wasn't just about earning money. It was about, kind of bouncing back ever than better before. And we've always played catch up with the fact that we have existing local plans that didn't really have that kind of offer in there. So I think it's really welcome, if I understood it correctly, that it's not about deviating from the seafront strategy character areas, but it's more from a planning definition point of view. I think that's really welcome. I think my one thing I would say is maybe don't lose the opportunity to be positive on it as well. I think this document is really pleasing to see, by the way, this coming back again. I think this should be an evolving strategy that we look at all the time, because things do change. And my reflection on where I think we probably haven't gone far enough in the character areas is being a bit more defined on what kind of new activities could happen in each of the areas. So it's been very much an explanation of how they are to date. So this area is very good for this area is very good for that. But as we try and increase things in the future, I do think we can and should be looking at, is there a family zone? Is there a sports zone? And being a little bit more defined, which may even help with that planning process going forward. But appreciate it's a bit late for that now. But that's just a comment more than anything else. The questions were, so first of all, I heard from Gary the really helpful rundown of the different projects that are underway. The portfolio holder said at the beginning that there was an aim to move away from the council doing things because of the well-rehearsed issues with inflation and the construction industry, etc., moving towards a more commercial approach with other operators. But I still don't know what we're changing on that, because I haven't really heard that there's a big. So which projects was the council planning on doing that we're dropping and moving towards a more commercial or partnership arrangement? Because nearly all of the projects that I'm aware of were either already like that or are funded by the Levelling Up Fund, etc., etc. So what are we changing? That's the first question.
Through you, Chair, if I may. So one of the most obvious ones to me is the Southbourne development. So we took the cafe that was down at Southbourne Beach down a number of years ago and have put a meanwhile use there, currently very popular destination, Sobo. There was a long-term vision to regenerate that site with a 2-storey offer, new restaurant, toilet facilities, beach pods. That suffered definitely at the hands of the inflation. We saw inflationary figures in the region of 45% on some of the work packages. So the cost of that project went up quite significantly. And unfortunately, Chairman, that was one that has not got off the ground. So obviously we still have the temporary offer down there. And like I said, it's incredibly popular at the moment. So that's something we would need to look again. But if there is going to be a long-term realisation of that site, it may well require a new approach. I would say the same as well, Chair, for Sandbanks Pavilion, which is another project that we worked through to Ariba Stage 2 design. That, again, has suffered from inflationary pressures. And, the inflation that we see every night on the news is not the same inflation that you see in the construction industry. It's been far higher in our experience. So, again, that's one where the cost plan was originally structured and the actual costs have come in a lot higher. So until prices go down, until the cost of borrowing gets, potentially easier, it's not something that the council could consider doing themselves. So again, we'll look at whether we can unlock some external investment in that one.
Thank you. So very, very good answer. And, for what it's worth, I probably have to declare an interest in that. I probably spend more money on Soho Beach than most other people do. It's one of my favourite places to go. And I think you're right. I think there is sometimes things change, and actually it's not for the worse. And I think the standard of offer down there just has a bit of something that we might not have achieved had we gone full hog with the plan from what, probably 4 years ago it first came up. So really, really pleased to hear that. I think that's probably welcome more than anything else. So the only other second question I had, and it might be that I'm reading too much into words within the paper, but on section 2.7 on the revised investment priorities, it talks about the beach-based seasonal food beverage offers, and talks about enabling diverse seasonal sports, leisure and food beverage offer. So yes, we like that, is kind of what I hear from there. But then on page 60, when it delves into, sorry, page 160 in the document itself, when it delves into a little bit more detail, it highlights areas on the promenade like unused beachfront beach hut sites and under the cloisters, but nothing about what actually happens on the beach. And just digging into what the Deputy Leader was saying earlier on around some of the changes that the administration might be thinking about some of those offerings. I mean, I cycled here tonight, and not that I want to name drop particular offerings, but the El Marino development, I just think is a really good example. When we've got 12 miles of beach, we might disagree on this, Chairman, but it's because you're wrong. But I know, I do think, with 12 miles of beach, it is a really good offering that takes up a very small amount of space, and it was buzzing tonight with people eating and enjoying themselves, and a really high class offer. So, but it doesn't really talk about that in this document. So are you moving away from that or not? Because I think when I speak to residents and people that are out there, with so much beach, I think we need to be investing there. I'm not saying we need more, but maybe we need to embed this in planning terms and make sure that we, as Gary said, offer longer leases so that investment can come in. But you're not moving away from that, are you?
Councillor Earl?
So I'm actually going to be very diplomatic between Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Broadhead, and actually say that both. So we're not fundamentally against activities happening on the beach. In fact, we have some amazing projects down there, whether it's commercial or whether it's sport. We want to see our beaches used for the best things that they can be and have a real range of offerings on our seafronts. What we're doing though is making sure that we use the planning process to be able to say where that is appropriate and where it isn't appropriate. And it does come down to our planning committee making a judgment and listening to the views of residents. And for me, that's what was missing before. It was the fact that we didn't have the ability for residents, people who use the beach on a day-to-day basis, to be able to object in any way. It was almost a bit imposed. So this is an opportunity to take both of those and try and create a bit more of a balance and an ability to have the best of both worlds, where we have good offerings, good development, but we do it in a way that takes due diligence and takes policy and process into account.
Just come back, and I completely agree with Councillor Earl's point. And as I said earlier on, I don't think it was a deliberate thing that the council stepped into. I think it was the fact that, as much as anything else, we still haven't got a new local plan. So we absolutely make sure that policy and planning should be aligned so that those objectives are clear, and we don't have a situation where we come up with a policy that we all agree with and then planning is out of step, or vice versa. I suppose my slight pushback is that this is a policy document, and a policy document can and should lead the way on that. And when it comes to activities on the beach itself, the actual strategy is silent. It talks about the promenade, it talks about the central Bournemouth area and more activities there. So if you kind of want clarity to drive the process, my only point would be, I think you might need to be a little bit more defined and put your flag in the sand, sorry, but literally, say what you mean, I think. But broadly speaking, all very welcome.
Yes, Councillor Earl.
Thank you. And I don't disagree. When we talked about this as a cabinet and how we would approach it, we wondered whether we should have a beach for, your young Ibiza party goers to enjoy Bournemouth in the rain, or whether we should have somewhere for older people or people who prefer a quiet life to go and sit and read their books. And I completely I love that view that we could have different areas for different things. I think though that is potentially something that we need to do a little bit more work to be able to define. And maybe that will come through in our planning zoning a little bit more, because then the character areas are great. I think the reason we haven't changed them is because they were pretty spot on. It was really only the capital projects that changed a little bit. I think we all agree, but maybe if there is what's the appropriate offering in those areas that helps define that character area, I think that's probably where we need to go in terms of our zoning approach.
Yes, you would mind it. But I just wonder, Councillor Broadhead, will you fit in the old people's beach or the young people's beach?
Chairman, there's no need for such a choice. As I think I said earlier on, with 12 miles of probably the best beach in Europe, I think there's room for everyone to live in harmony.
I know where you'd put me, so but yeah, I think there are clues in the paper in terms, because it does recognise the need to respect our environment and the characteristics of our beautiful uncluttered coastline, which has been an attraction, of course, for Bournemouth. That's why it exists, and it's a huge draw in itself, just being the way it is. Notwithstanding that, there's a need for developments and other things. It brings me to my first question on here about there seems to be a prioritisation for the needs of young people. It doesn't say about old people, and I'm just wondering what's driving this requirement about, is there a specific driver behind prioritising the need for young people to access the beach?
So just recalling when we first looked at this as a cabinet, it's because we do have a very clear interest in access for all children. I know that there are children in the conurbation who have never visited the beach, as an example. Like that for me is heartbreaking, to grow up in an area like this and not to have been. And I think also we looked at things like there's some really good activities. So if you look at Boscombe, you've got some amazing stuff. You've got surfing, there's some climbing walls, there's a brilliant play parks in some different areas as well. And I think it's more about having activities for children to be able to do whilst they're at the beach. So as a bit of a draw, and also to make it a proper experience as well. And we've seen some really good things across the country, like creating a bucket and spade library as an example, or put your inflatable here and allow someone else to pick it up. And we've actually got one of those down at the Eco Hub. And being able to make it as child friendly as possible, but also not so that young people feel like they're not welcome on the beach too. And sometimes I think there is a bit, we do need to kind of get that balance between families, children, adult, older people, and allow everyone to exist in harmony.
Thank you very much. You really surprised me with that comment, Councillor, because the beach is all about the kiddies, isn't it? It always has been. So I'm really surprised to hear that there's a feeling that people don't wish to accommodate young people on the beach, because I think that's always been something I don't know where that's coming from, but you've probably got some evidence, I guess, to support it.
I certainly hear a lot of comments about young people and antisocial behaviour on the beach, and actually I think it is a wonderful environment that you can visit for free. There's no money involved, you don't have to pay, whereas almost every other attraction in our conurbation is going to cost you some money. I know that is a full day out and it's pretty much cost free. So for me, I think there is something about making everyone feel welcome and making sure that there is amenities for everyone, like Councillor Broadhead was saying around that offering. But I think that's where the young people has come from, because we know that there are many children who don't have access to actually visiting the beach, and we need to open up those gateways. And things like the Levelling Up funding does a really good job at being able to do that, improving links and that kind of thing.
Thank you. I've just got one more. You mentioned Boscombe Pier. That's not part of the Levelling Up funding, is it? It wasn't, as far as I can remember. So where's the money coming from for that?
Thanks, Chair. So it is actually specifically referenced as one of the key objectives of the Levelling Up Fund. There is a feasibility study ongoing. The first stage of that was to develop a plan for what the structure can take. At the moment, obviously, there is nothing on the end of the pier. So really, it was around a condition survey, really trying to get a true picture. So it is a relatively small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. It's around £50,000 out of the full 20 million, but hopefully it will unlock a further funding opportunity for whatever Levelling Up turns out to be in the future. We know that that word has been dropped, but the principle of that funding remains important to the government.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goodall, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like, if I may, to seek clarification on the input from Natural England on the triple SIs, especially in Poole Harbour. I'd like to know where our responsibilities end and theirs begin, because I have, as a ward councillor, I have an experience from Natural England. And I just wondered if you had any comments on it.
Through you, Chair. So part of every project that we go through in its feasibility stage, we obviously have to look at the necessary consents. That's currently split between the planning authority and the marine management organisation. Essentially, there's a small overlap on the beach, but generally they work from the same principles. One 12 miles offshore to the beach, and one obviously inland to the low water mark. Within that, Natural England are a statutory consultee on every project that we go forward, and particularly the ones that we're looking at the moment, their impact on the local triple SI. We work with the countryside team. We look at any mitigation measures that we need to take in terms of any construction works, but also in terms of the long-term impact that any of our projects would have on that. So Natural England are an incredibly important part of that process. They were consulted recently on the pontoon project in Christchurch Harbour, and they were supportive of that, which is obviously why we were able to deliver that on time, thankfully.
Can I just one other question? I don't know whether this is the right forum to do this, but I just wanted to discuss food, because you talk in some length about healthy communities, innovative wellness, health and well-being, focusing on the community. Now, we're doing major builds, but nobody's talked about diet, food. We have at the moment a crisis with obesity levels in this country, and also type 2 diabetes in the UK. 90% of 4.4 million people live with diabetes, and it is believed that 1.2 million could be living with diabetes and are undiagnosed. I just wondered whether we, as a councillor, and believe me, as a self-employed male, I'm not in favour of the nanny state, but I do wonder at the same time, as we're looking at the production of physical stuff for keeping people healthy, we should also be looking at the way we lease restaurants and food outlets for low carb diets, for low sugar, and so it goes on, because we have a footfall of about 10 million tourists a year. I'm not sure that I even have a question, but I noticed that was not heavily inputted into the report.
Councillor Earl, yeah, I think you might like to answer that.
I think you're right. You know, we do have a lot of crisis in our public health services, particularly when it comes to health of young people and, to be honest, the entire population. And the beach is not a place to go for a healthy meal. Traditionally, you're going to get an ice cream, you may have some chips, and you may have an alcoholic drink. You know, they're not children, obviously, but I think you're right. We don't have an offering that is like the most healthy that we potentially could. And one of the ways we're trying to look at how we can tackle that is through the Durley environmental hub, and using that as an example to show others how we can supply potentially more healthy foods and still make it economically viable. And that applies also. So, for example, my big bugbear on the beach is single-use plastic. I cannot believe on a beach we still have single-use plastic. And I've already spoken to the Seafront team how I would be very keen at looking at how we, through our lease process, can try and negotiate that in the best way possible. And I was looking at some other council areas as well, which have done that exact thing on certain things. But you're right. It's about allowing and enabling businesses to offer what they need to get a good mix, but at the same time trying to get that balance and making sure that it's not, you know, we're not making it a unhealthy environment, and not making it feel like it's overly commercial that you have to buy something. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit.
If you don't like the food in the Eco Hub, you can fry your sausages on the free barbecues that's right outside it.
That's after I've killed them, so thank you.
So we've got 3 people waiting to speak. We've got Councillor Aikenhead, Councillor Moore, and then we've got Councillor Beasley. So Councillor Aikenhead, thank you.
Okay, I've got a few points, and I think some of them might be more points than questions. So I think the best thing is for me to say them all, and then you can answer whichever ones you want to. So first of all, on the recommendation about the event zones, I just wanted to urge you to make sure that ward councillors are involved for the specific zones, whichever ones you're talking about. I'm sure you were going to do that anyway. Next, I noticed a bit about, I really like the way that you'd put in for the key challenges and opportunities about the improving access for deprived local communities, and really take the point you said about some children haven't been to the beach even though they actually live in BCP. But I thought that maybe something could just be amended somewhere to actually include that in the strategies, because in the strategies it says concentrating on young people and people with disabilities, but it doesn't say anything about deprived local communities. And I think it would be good if that was specifically more in the strategy rather than just in the opportunities at the top. Particularly because when you talked about children, young people, you talked about children, and when people see young people, they're thinking of specific ages. And maybe if it said something like children and young people, and particularly ensuring that people from deprived areas, and also areas where there's lots of flats. A lot of our town centres have a huge number of flats, and there's children living in there who don't have gardens. And yes, they've got parks, that's nice, but going to the beach, that's good as well. And so making sure that, and I would say a lot of that, although it's a seafront strategy, some of the work that might need to be done for that is not about the seafront itself, but about providing the transport links from areas to the seafront. And that's something that's a little bit of an add-on, but I think it's worth a mention in here that we want to do that. So I noticed in one of the bits, it's the 2022 priorities, said something about culture, heritage and education. And I noticed that the 2004 priority just talked about sport and well-being, which sport and well-being is very important. But I don't think I want to completely drop the idea of culture and heritage, particularly because my area is Poole, and there's a lot of there's a lot of interest in Poole for keeping our culture and heritage, particularly maritime heritage. So you'd be going in very well with the ideas for the local plan and ideas for local developments in Poole if you were to keep words like culture, heritage and education in there. And then the other thing I was going to mention was just having a look to see which it is. Oh yes, the events. So, some nice ambitious ideas about having big events with talking to community groups and getting investment, but it would be nice to see something in there that talks about supporting smaller events that might not need so much money, community groups who run themselves, who've got volunteers, so you don't actually need lots of money and investment and commercial involvement, because you can run a very good event with just a load of volunteers. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really, really good feedback. And I'm really glad you're taking the time to read through it and kind of look at it with those fresh eyes, because I think every single point there has a huge amount of merit. And I would agree, like that last point in particular, I couldn't believe when I was holding like a voluntary organised community event in my local park that the council sent me a bill. Like, that's where we are. So I think there is a way in which we change to try and enable not just applying to the seafront, but applying to everywhere as well, so that we are encouraging those kind of on the ground activities. And I've been speaking to Councillor Martin, who's portfolio holder for culture, customer and communication, about that as well. And yes, on the other ones, it just maybe for clarity on tackling inequalities, we do include in here about, I had it here somewhere, access, where was it? Oh, I may have changed the page. I'm pretty sure in here it says about removing barriers for people to get to the beach. And I just want to highlight in that as well, like the levelling up fund, as you know, the basis on which that was submitted and was awarded is around what it can do for our communities across our area that don't live exactly on the seafront, and a lot of it is around unlocking transport links. I mean, it's something which we are still very keen to deliver, and I think it does have a lot of opportunity. What we need to do is make sure that we can stretch that money as far as possible to actually get those outcomes that will impact our communities a little bit further out, and bring those employment opportunities and bring that public transport and bring that access that maybe we don't have at the minute. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Moore, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a comment and a couple of questions, if that's okay. Going back to the Eco Hub at Dirty Chine, I know that it's got, actually, I do think that they've changed their menu, and they do sausages there now. I'm pretty sure that's what I saw. I wasn't going to say that, but I've just, yes, I know. Sorry about this. But it has got a space for community use, and personally, I would very much support schools using it to teach environmental awareness and that sort of thing. It's also, you've got quite a good view of the goats from there as well, so they might be interested in those. I was, and my grandchildren were. They couldn't get enough of the goats coming down the cliff. But yeah, if you could just sort of adapt that to use the for market it for schools more than anything else, I would have thought. And a couple of comments, no questions, sorry. You've got shipping containers at Boscombe Beach. Are they still there? And what's happening to them? Somebody could update me on that. And the other one was you want to improve disabled access facilities at sandbanks, which is fine. But I see you're saying that you're constrained by Borough Pool Act 1986 covering sandbanks recreation ground. I wasn't aware of that. I've been a pool councillor for many, many years. I just thought that's something that you've come up with. I'd just like to know a bit more about it, just the basics, if that's okay.
Councillor Earl, there's quite a lot there.
Sorry.
I was just going to mention with the Eco Hub in particular, yeah, the original intention was to build this amazing hub.
Yes.
Tick. But it's the next stage, which is including the educational facility and actually delivering what it was supposed to deliver, which is engaging not just young people, but everyone.
But everyone, yeah.
Respecting the beach.
I thought it would be particularly good for kids.
Absolutely, it will be, and I'm determined to get there. What we just need to do is find a way where we can deliver that with a potential partner. So whether it's working with a charity or whether it's working with maybe an education body, but to find a way where we can deliver it where it's not going to put pressure on our revenue. Because basically when the project was built, great, but there's no money for the ongoing delivery of that aim. And until we get there, I don't see it as a job done. We can't kind of leave it alone. We need to keep trying to reach that that outcome, because that's actually where the benefit is. That's where the gains to be made.
Amanda, thanks.
Thank you. In relation to the shipping containers question, so I believe you're probably referring to the Toft Business Park. So yes, they are still there, and we've been doing some work recently with our investment and development colleagues and economic development to be able to take forward the next stages of the Towns Fund element that have supported the provision.
I was going to say, was it the Boscombe development money you were going to use? Yeah.
That's right. So work on that is progressing at the moment, and I'll refer to my colleague Gary to respond to your other question.
Through you, Chair. So I can speak about the Poolack in terms of the Sandbanks Pavilion project, because that's something that obviously we've been focused on. The Act is quite specific in terms of how buildings can be operated, and particularly whether they can be operated independently by third parties, external investment, or whether they have to be operated by the council. So that does change our potential model for some of these facilities, because if we want to attract that external investment, an external investor is going to want a little bit more control than what the Poolack currently offers. So again, that's something that we're looking at specific to that project, if that helps, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Beasley, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 4 items I'd just like to speak to, and some of them involve questions, so I'll deal with them in no particular order. The first one is to go back to the presentation itself with regard to capital investment and the position of the council in terms of trying to gain as much investment from the private sector as possible. Of course, construction inflation affects the private sector every bit as much as it does the public sector, and so there's no sort of free pass there. And what I was interested in was how we are going to help to lever that private sector investment in. What are we specifically going to do that's going to manage to achieve that, apart from, but including, obviously, a planning system that is going to be cooperative to the fundamental aim of this strategy, but how is it actually going to work in practice in terms of bringing in that investment? And will the council be considering within that how it can pump prime that and be supportive of it? Perhaps we could deal with that one first, Chairman. I'll come back to the others in a moment.
You get all the easy questions, Councillor Earl.
I think that's a really good point, though, because it's all very well us putting it in a document, but actually when it comes to the delivery, we need to know how it's going to be done. I would just say in the meantime, what we have been doing is packaging up some of these places, and I know Gary has been engaging with some of the potential investors that we have in the area. What I want to do, though, I think we need to go further afield and actually look outside of BCP, outside of even the region, to find more commercial opportunities and places that people that want to come and invest in seafront, because it is such a unique location. I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think we really talk about what the opportunities are for investment. Like, we talk about it being a nice place, but actually there's a huge amount of potential for growth, and that isn't always conveyed, in my view. I think moving linking up the kind of visitor economy in that destination alongside bringing in investment is essential, and it's probably not something we can do on our own. I think we're going to have to work with partners both in places like Destination Management Board, I think the sector in terms of tourism, the hoteliers, and also looking to, you know, if we get an ABID in the area, that they are going to be doing destination marketing if it is successful at appeal, which I'm hoping we can kind of piggyback on a little bit, because that's what we need, really. We need to be going out there looking for money, rather than just hoping someone's going to knock at the door.
And I would imagine, Chairman, that in terms of our capital expenditure, we're going to have our work cut out in terms of the issues around Bournemouth Pier, which are going to be, they're already substantial, but they are growing literally month by month. And that will also be a challenge in terms of cliff stabilisation, another responsibility that we've got. Those are two big bits of CapEx, which the private sector obviously are not going to be interested in because they're local authority responsibilities. So that will minimise, I suspect, anything that the council is likely to put in. So I'm pleased to hear that wider approach. There's always opportunity to learn from others, and it's free. So that's a good thing. The second thing was around a point raised by the Vice Chairman, and I was going to ask about this anyway. I, in passing, heard something about Alum Chine, about which I'm completely unaware, although I'm one of the ward councillors. I think the issue of engagement with ward councillors, those who have coastal wards, is absolutely critical in this. And that isn't a general sort of seminar with all ward councillors present. It's about taking the time to work through proposals in advance of them being public and before the members of the public are asking ward councillors about them. And I think, I know the Vice Chairman raised it in the context of event zones, really, really important, because if that goes wrong, it's the ward councillors who carry the can for it. And so therefore that early engagement is important, but also in terms of specifics that change or have investment from the council, because for every bit of investment you've got, there is usually an interested party living locally who either doesn't approve, or if they've got a beach hut, there's a problem, etc. And I think that early engagement with those ward councillors, ward by ward, is critical. And it's about harnessing those who will be on board and supportive, rather than actually being in opposition before we start. So that was my second point, Chairman. I don't think it needs. I would hope that was going to happen anyway, actually. Yeah. The third one was with regard to the interests of the estates, Cooperdene and Merrick, most particularly about Merrick, although their demises do abut each other on the West Cliff. And so the long leasehold interest, as far as Merrick are concerned, which goes from Happy Lands to just west of Boscombe Pier, is critical to this. And I just wondered, I suppose, what engagement and consultation there had been, specifically with Merrick, but perhaps with Cooperdene as well, and what the current relationship is with Merrick as an outcome from that. Because my experience is that unless you've done that and actually taken them with you, you're just storing up problems for tomorrow. So that was a question, Chairman.
Yeah, if I may. So the relationship with Merrick is incredibly important to us, as is Cooperdene. We obviously work with our estate team to manage that relationship specific to each and every project where we need consent, or at least, you know, a broad support in terms of providing information. The relationship between officers, I think, is very good. I've met with officers from Merrick Estates regularly, and certainly we're all on the same page in terms of the outcomes we want to achieve, particularly as an example on the East Cliff Lift project, where we obviously have got stabilisation funded by the Levelling Up Fund, but there's a future vision for that site. So I can only speak from officer level. I feel the relationship is really good in that particular example.
Councillor Earl?
I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to meet with the Merrick Estate yet directly, but I have already been talking about doing that because I think it's very important. I was going to use that as a chance to explain from my point of view kind of what our vision is going forward, not just from the seafront strategy. That's sort of already been through the consultation and those elements, but actually there's some of the wider issues that we face in the area and how we can link up between our seafront to to basically service things like the town centre? How do we make it an entire destination that people want to visit and not view it too separately? So it is in my mind to do, and just from a political point of view, I would like to meet them, but I haven't had the chance yet. Hasn't happened.
Well, my experience is that early engagement will repay, always bearing in mind that the estate, the Merrick estate from Happy Land Street just west of Boscombe Pier, and the freehold of the foreshore, the promenade and the cliffs, and we are just the leaseholder. So it is important to engage with the freeholder, I think. That's a matter obviously for the administration and for officers, but you ignore that, I suspect, at your peril. My final point, Chairman, is with regard to the issue of enforcement, because it's all very well us painting a very rosy picture, gaining investment both externally and internally, and making the seafront strategy deliver what everybody wants it to for residents and for tourism as well. But it's only in certain respects as good as the enforcement that takes place. And I know that Deputy Leader of the Council has had some engagement with some residents local to me over this only in the last week. But the issue of the seasonal dog bans and cycling are absolutely crucial to an enormous number of people. And I just wonder what resources are going to be put into that enforcement, effective enforcement, and how we are going to manage the issue of tents on the beach, as an example, given that despite public consultation being overwhelmingly in favour of introducing a PSBO, that isn't going to happen for whatever reasons. But we still have the problem there, which obviously is something which will gain even higher profile as we hit the peak of the summer season next month. So I just think that is something that's often overlooked, the practical enforcement, rather than saying, well, we've got bylaws for this and we've decided not to introduce something for that. People notice these things, and the quality of this resort, in particular, the Bournemouth part of it, is fundamental to making sure that enforcement actually takes place.
Yeah, Councillor Earl.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I agree. It's not just about what's there, it's about how it's actually operating and what the successes are. And having been portfolio holder for Seafront for a year, I'm very, very aware of the issues that we have on the seafront, and it's become quite interesting seeing the different perspectives. For example, I get some people very upset they can't walk their dogs everywhere, and then other people who are upset that there's even dogs going near the beach. And it's been very interesting actually to understand the different ways in which people approach the beach and what it should be used for, and it's given me a bit of a broader understanding of what people's expectations are when they go to the beach. But just coming back to enforcement, on the PSPO where we have tents on the beach, the PSPO process, and of course this has been explained when we went through the PSPO process and it came to cabinet. The PSPO process needs to demonstrate harm. It needs to demonstrate that there is a measurable amount of harm caused by a particular behaviour. The response from residents and from all sorts of people we engage with on the consultation was that, yeah, we don't like it. Yeah, it causes a bit of a problem. Yeah, it's a bit of a nuisance. It leads to other kind of behaviours. But that behaviour itself did not demonstrate a harm enough to be able to use the PSPO legislation to make the changes that we wanted to and be able to enforce against it. We were able to put in some of the issues around it that kind of, things like noisiness and antisocial behaviour, things like drinking. We were able to define the harm on those ones, but the actual act of sleeping in a tent on the beach wasn't something that we could actually put a definition on and show and demonstrate that within that legislation it was appropriate. That doesn't mean that it stops being an issue. It's still an issue, and it's something that our community safety team are reviewing constantly to see if we can find that harm through the complaints process and through what people say. So it's not something that we sort of said no, not at all, but it's something that we're monitoring to see if we can then add that to the PSPO if we can demonstrate harm through it.
On the issue of wider enforcement, I think I can just set the context that, of course, we are under a huge amount of revenue pressure funding. One of the things I often hear from people who use the beach and maybe the beach hut renters is, you know, we never see a ranger, or along those kind of lines. And I think something that I've really learned is that we take a risk-based approach. Some of our beaches are actually incredibly well behaved, you know, when people go and visit, and we don't have the issues that we see in other beaches where actually we get crowds and crowds of people, and it can become a quite a threatening environment, and actually there's a lot of risk there. So we do move resource around to put it in the right places where it's going to make the biggest impact. But the example you were talking about the other day, I have already raised that with officers, because that's not, we need to have that consistency, but make sure that we are still flexible enough to be reactive when there is a risk arising, because we have a huge amount of responsibility on the seafront. I think Amanda might want to add something to that.
Thank you. Just to add to what Councillor Earl has explained there, so we do have the Seafront Rangers team who are out across the seafront offering advice and reminders and education to a lot of our beachfront users as well. Some of those individuals take that on board, perhaps more than others. With the PSPO powers that we have, that has provided more powers, but it hasn't given us additional resource and additional funding to significantly enhance that provision. So we're working as a team to, as Councillor Earl says, identify where that resource is best used at which times of year, and make sure that we're getting hopefully the best responses from that.
Thank you. Before you come in, Councillor, Claire's point here on whilst the PSPO might not be applicable for camping on the beach, we do have bylaws that prevent, or it's supposed to prevent it. Now, what is the legal status of bylaws at the moment? Because it seems to me that they're all ignored now, but they are actually still bylaws, and they can be used to enforce where necessary.
I do know the answer, but
Thank you.
It.
Thank you, Chair. The bylaws are in place, and our Rangers team will go out and take appropriate action where those bylaws aren't being followed. There's also a lot of work going on with our communities team around some of those campers on the beach who perhaps need further assistance from outreach services. So we're working closely within a number of services within the council to take forward responding to those items.
Does that mean that you will move people on who are camping under the bylaw legislation?
So the team undertake checks and try and get details, and do encourage those camping on the beach to move on.
Not sure encouragement is enforcement, but Councillor Broadhead, come on.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And it is on this point, and I do appreciate we are slightly expanding the remit from this paper, but it is related to the seafront and a strategy. So there you go. It feels legitimate to me. I just wanted to pick up on a point that Amanda just raised, because I completely agree with Councillor Beasley, and I know we had the political discussion before about the PSPO and the camping on the beach, and I know that we probably agreed to disagree on what the definition of harm was, and I think it was fundamentally a political decision to avoid challenge in the future rather than anything else. But what I think I just heard from Amanda was that the parts of that PSPO process did go through. You know, there were parts of the PSPO that went through, but I think I heard Amanda say that despite having those powers, there isn't resource to basically use them. So are we really in a position where, not only having ignored 75% of people on the illegal camping on the beach, but the other ones that were passed, we're not doing anything about it? Because that's really worrying if so.
Amanda.
Thank you. It's not that we don't have resource to implement the PSPO powers. We have resource within the Seafront team. What we haven't had is a significantly enhanced budget to be able to employ a large number of additional Seafront Rangers on top of what we already had. So we're working with the team that we have and the resource that we have to make sure that we're delivering a safe environment and implementing the powers that we now have through the PSPO.
Yeah. Go on, Millie. I think Millie wants to come in first.
I really disagree. It wasn't a political decision not to use the PSPO route for putting tents on, for enforcing against tents on the beach. It was because legal advice to us was very clear that if we were to take that approach, then we would probably be going through another very expensive legal process to try and defend that decision. I know we differ on this. I'm not a risk taker when it comes to taxpayers' money. So there was no way I was going to make that decision. We discussed it very carefully as a cabinet to decide that actually no, we would try and find other ways in which we could do it and keep an eye on whether we can then demonstrate harm within the PSPO legislation. But just talk about the wider enforcement issue, like, the way I understood it is that, and I might be completely wrong, so tell me if I am, but bylaws are enforceable by the police, whereas PSPOs are enforceable via delegated powers to officers, CSAS officers or rangers or that kind of thing. Someone who has had that power delegated, has been through the through the training and everything else. I think where we're really struggling is being able to convert, and I don't mean that in any other way, but convert our existing staff who are Seafront Rangers or people who've been there for a very long time to then take on the additional powers to be able to put in that enforcement. And I think it's something we need to consider as a team, in terms of the operational team, of actually, is the enforcement more important than the experience of someone who's able to deal with the operational issues that we have on the beach, and actually how we use that resource and the resource that we have to be able to get the best for residents and visitors who actually use the beach.
And just a final point on this, and I get all of that, and to be really clear to Amanda and the team, this was not at all a criticism of the council officers who I know are working within the parameters of what they had, but once again I would underline the point that, and I get what you're saying, it's a balance, and we've got to look at what the priorities are, but this is a political decision. I'm not trying to make it political, but it is a political decision. And I would say that residents would expect, if you have powers, that resource is directed to adequate enforcement. Because I think if you asked many people, and you've had the emails this week and I've been CC'd into them, if you saw that there were lots of tents on the beach last night, it was, it's been all over social media in the last day. I think residents would expect some resource to using the powers that we've got rather than encouragement, because I think we can all know what encouragement quite often, how effective it is. But I've said my piece, and point landed, hopefully.
Okay, members, I think we've probably done this one to death now, and it's been a good debate, actually. Some interesting points have come up, but what we have seen is more clarity given into the strategy. It does reflect, I think, some slight shift in emphasis to make sure that the environment is considered properly and our planning systems does align with the seafront strategy, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet basically, which is great. So yeah, it's not a completely new strategy, it's just adding and clarifying to what we already have, and it's really good. And for the record, I do really like some of the seafront developments, and I like the Sobo one. I think it's great fun, and I think development in the right place is absolutely the right thing to do. So with that, the report is to approve the BCP seafront strategy, and then the delegation to the COO in consultation with the portfolio holder for connected communities to identify specific event zones with the seafront strategy categories. I don't personally have any issue with those recommendations. Anyone wish to comment on them or disagree with them? Okay, it looks like we have an agreement on that. So with that, thank you very much, and thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much for your Lovely. Okay, and thanks for your time. Thanks for your presentation. So we've now got the forward plan, which is the last I think on the agenda. Now, yeah, having spent so much time looking at our forward work plan, of course, it was all then rudely interrupted by the general election, which really knocked our agenda out of the window, really. And we've had to now look again at moving things around, and we've had an attempt at it. And we had come up with a revised schedule, but now we had today a new cabinet forward plan, which is going to change our view on things again, I'm afraid. So if anybody does have anything specific about the forward plan they want to raise now, please let's do it. But what I will do is ask Lindsay to just summarise some of the things that are likely to happen to the forward plan over the next couple of months. As I said, we did have a look at it, but it cannot be fixed yet because of the reissue of the cabinet plan. But before we go on to Lindsay, then Kate. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, if Lindsay wants to speak first, so I'm not just asking things she's already going to cover, that's fine. Sorry.
I'll just take you through the updates in your forward plan, because the chair has made some updates to what's published at Appendix B for you. What we're looking is for you to approve those. Just as I started talking, just to highlight to you a couple of things on the cabinet forward plan that are imminent that I think you want to be aware of, and then you can go and have a wider look at the rest of it. In your August meeting, which is your next one, you may want to plan in the Q1 corporate performance monitoring report. It's titled slightly differently within the cabinet forward plan, but you've already said that you would receive those when coming through, and I would suggest that you add that one in.
Yeah, can I just talk on that?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do see the new metrics that are used for measuring performance and how we're performing against it. We knew that we had a change in the strategy about how performance was going to be measured, but we didn't have the matrix. We had a general idea of it. So this will be the first time we get an opportunity to see that system in process. We do have a slot in the August meeting because we had something, and I think it was culture and leisure centre and funding and investment for that. It won't be ready. And so arts and culture, that's going to move. It's still there, Crispin, but we are going to have to move that, I'm afraid. So we do have a slot that we can put this item in. So members are happy with that. Yeah, everyone's obviously happy with that. Yes.
If I take you through all the changes, and you can let me know if there's any dissent at the end, that might be easier for you. For September, a pre-decision item from the cabinet forward plan is the biannual update on regeneration programme. You've also previously said that you will receive those when they come through, so you may want to schedule that one in. Moving on to your actual forward plan at Appendix B to that report. Just to confirm, then the August items would be the council assurance review report and the Q1 performance monitoring report. You'll note there's a number of budget scrutiny items timetabled within there. I think we've communicated with you all as councillors and raised it within the board already, but you'll be aware that there's a programme of budget scrutiny that's now been mapped out in consultation with executive members and the ONS chairs. So another plug for a training session on the 29th of July that you've had to your diaries. That's an all-member session. And then in terms of ONS, you've now got planned into your work plan a directorate budget awareness item in September. The plan is for that to go to all ONS committees on the relevant areas within those committees, from which some ONS working groups and short, sharp working groups on the budget over about a period of a month can take place for you to do a deep dive into any specific areas that you think need looking at in terms of the development of the budget. And then in November, there is an item planned in around the budget, which would be for all those working groups to feed back to the ONS board. So there's an approach where it all feeds into one place. So you'll see those within the work plan. In September, there is an item on public consultations within your work plan. There have been a number of discussions in the background with officers and with councillors around the potential scoping of some work that might add value around public consultations. But the aim of the report that's written into September currently is for you just to receive a sort of, this is where we are now, these are the legal requirements on us as a council, from which you can determine if there's any value you can add through doing some deeper dive scrutiny. I would flag that the officers have suggested that this be delivered slightly later because there's some time constraints, so that might be one to move into October.
Yep.
There is a strike through item in September, which was a housing inquiry session. The update for you around that is that there is now going to be an all-member housing workshop in September planned. So this would very much have been a duplication of that. I think to put this in an ONS setting in September. We have been liaising with officers and they have all the content of any ONS requests that have been raised around housing for that to be brought out within that session. That's not to say that there wouldn't be any scrutiny opportunities available, but I think that that would be the first step, and that session is around a refresh of the housing strategy. So that's already planned in, and that's why that item is struck through on your work plan. The chair has requested an update on the blue badge process following recommendations that came through from ONS last year. That's written into October now. December, you have crime and disorder scrutiny. That is an annual item that you have to do. Just to flag that I have had a request for more of a deeper dive into the domestic abuse strategy, which is undergoing a refresh. That would fall under that umbrella of the crime and disorder scrutiny, which is the community safety partnership scrutiny. So I wanted to flag that we are looking at maybe a deeper dive around that you could receive there. The local transport plan, I want to flag that that is still written into a date to be allocated. We are very well aware that this board wants to be involved earlier than a pure pre-decision just before cabinet stage. We're feeding that in and we are liaising with officers. From what I understand at the moment, it's quite a complex timeline around that. So we're just trying to find the right time for them to bring something meaningful to you to input in. And we might need to seek more views from you on when exactly you want to be involved in that. There had been a business improvement districts item written into July previous to the cancellation of meetings. The chair has since advised that he thinks that would be better as a briefing session. So as you know, we're trying to keep information giving into briefing sessions rather than in the public domain. So with the aim of this being to gather information from business improvement districts, that would need some further scoping and some timetabling, but you'll see that that's currently listed within your briefings section on the work plan.
Yeah, just a moment. Yeah, Councillor Broadhead.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I agree with that one. I think the work that the business improvement districts do are absolutely vital, and I wouldn't see that session as us scrutinising the bids per se, but we have invited them in previously in scrutiny, and we've actually found some interesting stuff about their relationship with the council, where it's working, where it's not, which I think has proved useful. I'm not convinced we'll get that in a briefing session, and also I don't think it's necessarily accountable enough publicly that people may want to see. I mean, let's be clear. There's this, and this has been happening for many years. It's not a point about the current administration, but there has been a move for more of the services that traditionally local authorities have been doing to move to business improvement districts, and there's sometimes some tension there. So I'd be keen to find out what they're doing, what we're doing, how that relationship's working in this forum properly.
Let me just come back on that. One of the reasons is that, you know, I think, is it 5 bids we now have? Yeah. 5. And when we looked at the bids before in overview and scrutiny, actually they all gave a presentation. It took a long time, and that's what I suspect. You know, do you get 5 bids all coming in, telling us what they're doing, how they're organised, what their aims and objectives are, and what they think is wrong with the way we run things? You know, it in itself, I think the first step is to actually gather the information to find. Doesn't stop us inviting people back for an overview and scrutiny point, bearing in mind, of course, that they are not accountable to the council, and nor do we have the remit to scrutinise them. They are private organisations. Okay, they're a partner, and we have synergies with them, but you know, you cannot actually scrutinise them in the same way that we can some of our own areas. But so I think it's the first step, presentations to find out where they are, what they want to do, what they want from us, is just as a first step. We can take it from there. That's my view. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to give you a little bit more advice on that item as well, we are now more widely using key lines of inquiry documents as a brief document, just to capture what it is exactly you want to get out of scrutiny. It is perfectly appropriate to be able to provide those to the bids to say this is what you're asking of them in whatever format that comes, whether it's presentation, briefings, or a public item. So I would encourage that to make sure that it's a valuable session. And then I wanted to flag to you, there are a number of items that have next to them a note to say that they need further scoping. These are items that really were raised through your workshops, and some of them were just raised as suggestions without any further scope put around them at that stage. They do really need some key lines of inquiry put to them so that we can develop the scope. We'll go away to officers and work up something that can add some value to the council. So these items that are written in are in October, 2 items, one around transformation and the centralised handling of complaints, and another around the performance of the council. Both of those would need some tighter scoping to be able to develop. In November, there's one about working more collectively across BCP geographical areas. In a date to be allocated, there is an item around accounting for social value in decision making. And there is also now, as a date to be allocated, the arts, culture and leisure funding, which I think just needs a bit more scope around it so that we can make sure we're bringing something valuable to you and which meets your information requirements. So we are learning about this sort of process around establishing more proactive scrutiny topics, but we do need some input, I think, from you as members to make sure that we're meeting what your wishes are with those items. I think I can stop there and see if there's any comments on all of that.
Chair, through you, I just wanted to ask about, I've completely forgotten what I was going to ask about. Oh yeah, sorry, the working plan. You were talking earlier about consultation concerning transportation, but are we going to be covering consultation in specific in generic terms in the modus operandi? Because that came up at the about the park gates and how it was dealt with, and I think it's quite important that we need to do one before we do the other, or at least we've got the information prior to doing the transformation.
Yes, it is the general subject about how we consult that we will be looking at. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that satisfy Councillor Salmon's query as well?
Yes, thank you. You covered it.
Yeah, I think a couple of other things. We talked and I wrote to members about volunteering for the budget working groups, and we had 2 volunteers. Kate, thank you, and Councillor BC too. We could do with 1 more volunteer if anybody would like to do that.
That was not me volunteering, Chairman. The question was
too late. You're
always think before putting your hand up, Phil. Does it have to be a member of this panel? Because I think we may have members interested.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Okay. And each of the overview scrutiny committees will have its own working group, and the aim is that they will come in and present to the overview scrutiny board, where you have one final flash at it. But no, it would. I don't believe it would have to. It could be any member that can volunteer for it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just let us know who they might be or through the chair, I think the aim is always to work flexibly and get the right people on the working group that can commit and are keen to get involved.
That equally applies to the working group that I've suggested regarding performance of the council generally, where I've asked for volunteers. I haven't had any yet, but if anybody would like to volunteer for that, we're still looking for volunteers for that working group. Yeah.
Apologies, I have got one more thing to raise. So in terms of your working groups, your capacity is you can have one at a time per committee. So you are expected to be tied up with something around September to November around the budget, beyond which you may want to establish a working group, and you've got quite a number of possible deep dive areas that you could look at. So we've done some early scoping around public consultation. The chair has raised the performance of the council one, but in order to progress this effectively, it would be really helpful for us to know what your priority will be as a board for your next working group, so that we can get on, scope the right piece of work for you and get it moving, rather than scoping lots of bits here and there all at once. So any sort of priority areas that you feel you really want to move ahead, if you could feed that into us outside of the meeting, that's really helpful, I think, to know.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, I think we're probably at the end of that. And once we've got, I think, a more structured forward plan, we'll probably issue it again probably before the next meeting, and we'll invite comments on it at that point.
So are we happy with it as drafted and with these changes suggested?
I am. I personally am.
Or is any dissent from any of it?
No, it looks like we're all happy. Okay, it's just gone 10 to 9. Close the meeting. Thank you.